And dear friends, we are going to start right away. Can you please tell me, do you have us already in your screen? Okay, so let's talk what we are going to have today in our Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. I'm happy to welcome our respected and respectful guests. On Friday, we had a pleasure to be present at the opening of the exhibition National Artistic Museum of Ukraine, Identity, which actually deliberates who and what we are in this world of war, how this identity is formed. And today, just crossing the road to our press center in the Ukrainian House, we are going to have a discussion with the artist and the curator of this exhibition. And the topic is searching and hiding common and different in the identity of the countries, of the North, Baltic countries, and Ukraine. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Solvita Krese, art critic, curator of the exhibition, director of the Latvian Centre for Contemporary Art, also artist Roman Minin, artist from Ukraine, Kristina Norman, who represents Estonia, Mats Leiderstam from Sweden, and Tellervo Kalleinen. So please introduce Solvita Krese. Thank you very much, from Finland. We have 1 hour to go at our disposal because we are going to work through the simultaneous interpreter. If we need more time, we can continue without interpreters because the language of the artist well understood without interpretation. I mean, the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. We are online in Ukrainian and the English languages in YouTube. Everybody who could not make it here because of the deterioration and the weather conditions, they could not make it here, but they watch us on through the internet. And please do not speak too fast because we need the translation to be made properly. So please, you have the floor.
No, it's already a good day, I should say. Yeah, it's hard to understand it's in morning or day because it's so snowy and so it's great today. But I should say that this discussion is held in the framework of exhibition, which you can see just opposite this main European plaza. It's exhibition Identity Behind the Curtain of Uncertainty. And it's a political gesture coming from embassies of Nordic and Baltic countries located in Ukraine. And they wanted to show their support to Ukraine developing toward Europe. And when I was invited to curate this exhibition, I was really thinking what will be the backbone of concept of this exhibition. And I came first to Ukraine in 2014. It was already after the occupation of Crimea and when war started in Donbass. And obviously all conversations ended up with mentioning war and with discussing identity, who we are, where is our future, what will happen, and how do we feel in this particular moment. And then it became clear that identity is this topical issue what I'm going to deal with in the framework of the exhibition. But there is, of course, another question, how to find kind of common platform to talk about identity, and including all those three different territories, Nordic countries, Baltic countries, and Ukraine. Obviously, we all are representing different historical backgrounds, different political, economical, cultural backgrounds, but we have one common thing. So we are all of our countries are located in northeast periphery of Europe, and this location on borderland, on crossroads between different political forces has affected our fates quite oftenly. And meanwhile, I was working on this exhibition. Also, tremendous changes were happening in Europe. We were facing a refugee crisis and this encounter with other cultures and changes in our political directions and decline of economies. Also created many many situations that demands us to revisit our identity and also to reevaluate values we used to take for granted for many years. And I think this constellation creates really very good background to discuss those issues and pose the questions what our identity consists of. And obviously it's not homogeneous identity, it consists of many different aspects, and it's influenced by stereotypes, by myths created for somebody else. It's also very strongly influenced by our feeling of belief to particular territory, nation, social group, gender, and many, many other aspects. And looking at all those changes which are going on now, I should say that we are living in kind of era of uncertainty. And what we try to do in framework of this exhibition, we try to unveil certain levels of our identity and look behind this curtain of uncertainty and just look with curiosity and try to figure out what we can find there. And therefore we invited 4 artists, participants of exhibition, to talk about their experience and their position toward this issue of identity. And first of all, I would like to ask a question to Roman Minin, Ukrainian artist, whose work is located in a really central place of the exhibition, and it's a curtain which is depicting mythology of Donbas. And obviously there are, as probably I'm wrong, but as I can recognize, there is very present this iconography of so-called severe style, which was very much used in Soviet era and which was representing Soviet ideology in the framework of social realism. And yesterday you were mentioning that it's rather difficult to understand Donbas man, that you should step 2 steps toward him, he will not come to you. And I would like to ask you, how could you describe this particular Donbas identity? Is it still influenced by the presence of this Soviet ideology, as I just traced it to this severe style references? And how do you feel after the war started in Donbas? Does somehow united people or contrary divided it? And how it influences Donbas identity? Do you feel that there is kind of particular identity for the region, and how is changing now, or does it changing?
Thank you very much for your question. An excellent, wonderful exhibition which raises very important issues. And I would like to cast our, well, let's say, to rewind the time about 20 years back and discuss those specific questions 20 years ago, not based on the effect of this tragedy which took place in this country, Ukraine, but before that, because you actually raised the question, and we ourselves, we raised the questions which could be used as an item on the agenda in order to prevent the war 20 years ago. But since nobody took care of those issues, maybe deliberately, intently, but if maybe not, but we have what we have. This war which divided the people for many years to come, for many and several generations perhaps to come. And we will have to cure, to treat this syndrome maybe for at least 2 decades, 20 years. But owing to the art, owing to the soft power, over to this peaceful program of our mutual understanding, our communication, maybe we can reduce this period of time. Maybe we can approach each other to achieve rapprochement between the 2 different, sides, and sooner than that, and to bring closer this kind of, again, have a mutual understanding between each other. So that's why I wanted to exert my efforts in order to bring it closer in time. The as soon as possible understanding of each other, to bring it closer. In any case, I'm against war. Any war separates the people, but of course, some people are united by the war, which is natural thing. But since it's happened in this way, so let it be an impetus or a push for the generation of new ideas, new cultural codes, which the majority of the people will be united by the general peace. And many people from Donbass, from Donetsk region, maybe for the first time in their lives, they paid attention or started to realize that they live not in the Donetsk region, but in the world, and those people would want to have the mutual understanding. They want the Donbass region and Ukraine be a part of the global entity, and we have to think about that. And since for 20 years, those people in Donetsk and Lugansk regions, found themselves in a kind of volunteer isolation. I'm talking about the volunteer cultural isolation. For many people now, the doors are open, and we have to learn how to understand each other now.
Do you believe that artists could somehow influence this situation, or could at least mediate this situation and kind of deliver this positive message?
For example, can you imagine the situation, kind of recital some of musician or concert of Karchuk? Everybody is in raptures. They give him a lot of applause, but the result, there is its song. There are some applause, and 2 days after this concert, two people are still under the impression of this concert. But this is the genre of music. Our genre of fine arts. We use the language of images, installations. It works in a different lapse of time. And I believe for the sake of this exhibition, for what actually the artists are doing, we need a different period of time in order to evaluate, to assess the results of the efforts of an artist, in order to evaluate the outcome of this exhibition. I believe we have to get together 1 year later or in 2 years from now just to talk about the results. That's why these kind of long-term projects, for 5-year project or 10-year project, are badly needed today.
To evaluate the result of art, you should really look at this event from the time distance. And then I would like to ask Matt Leiderstam, because he's working with collection of National Art Museum of Ukraine, and obviously those artworks who are collected in museum and who are selected represent particular point of view, and there is already this time distance. You can evaluate them from the time. And it was very interesting then Matt was putting up those his artwork, and he chose 4 paintings, and one of them was landscape. And then, and those are works of anonymous artists or unknown artists, and he tried to figure out what this landscape is, where does it comes from, and somebody from museum employees told that it's Donbass, and suddenly this landscape became very political, and yeah, how landscape could be political, and that is a question I would like to ask you. How can you look at collection of museum in general, and also particular museum in Ukraine? Do you think that collection could also represent certain aspects of identity or kind of like certain aspects of ideology? How do you think?
Thank you for the question. I think that in a way the museum as such, as a kind of model, it's very international in terms of how it is organized, that it is a space where you are collecting artworks and to present it, and where we are doing there, and the museum is more or less the same activity in every museum all over the world. However, what's in the museum is of course formed by a national or an intention specifically. And in this case, I first asked for unknown paintings of that you usually have in museums. Most museums have unknown paintings in terms of that it's unknown artists, and maybe they're also depicting unknown people and so on, and that's part of the collection as such. But here I then stumbled into, because I didn't know about this, of course I knew the political history of Soviet Union and so on, but I didn't imagine that you still had this collection of artworks that was seized during the Stalin terror in the 30s, and that they were still kept in the museum. And when I went in to choose them, I didn't choose them from my projection of what could be Ukrainian. I rather choose them from my perspective, seeing them from landscape, portraits, other aspects, what you can see, and also that they also maybe tapped into a style of art history that was from the 30s, so that they were modernistic, expressionistic, and its style of what the rest of Europe was doing during the same time. And my aim was to put them back on easels to create a kind of zero position before they became political, before they got identity and all this, to move them into a kind of neutral space of the artist studio. Of course, they are still political, as you pointed out with this landscape of Donbass. What I did with that landscape was not to comment really on that it could be Donbass. What I comment on was where could it have been done physically from the studio, from what is the point of view of the artist. So I placed it on an easel and cut it out the window because I imagine it to be seen through a window. And I think as an artist, when you come to this kind of situation, also specifically coming from a country that started to form a national identity in the 1520s when we became a country. And since then, we had a war, I think, 1812 last time. And we were always outside of all things. We have always been distant and neutral and all this. This means that we have formed a very different national identity, which is a bit looking from distance. And of course, it's still a national identity, but it's a bit different.
I just want to ask, because you were started to talk about identity as representing Sweden, as being the artist from Sweden, because Sweden is one of countries which is one of few countries which at the moment has this rising economy, and also you are still have very stable status of being a welfare state in spite of a crisis of refugees, and in spite of many other difficult questions you should raise. I would like to ask you, do you feel changes in identity in Sweden, and kind of how do local people feel, and does crisis in Ukraine influence Sweden, and how does it influence, and what are those new trends in your society? What is changing now?
I think Sweden, as the rest of Europe, is in a kind of transition, and it's a lot of things happening in the same time. We are, of course, influenced by what happened in Ukraine. Sweden has always looked upon Russia as the powerful neighbor that you always have to deal with in one way or another. And we had, in a way, forgotten that they were there. And we were reminded depending what's happening in Ukraine. So we have started now to put money into military and all this thing. And it's a lot of discussions if we are going to be part of NATO or not, and how we collaborate with Finland and all these discussions. The other thing is happening is, of course, the immigration crisis. Well, I would not really call it crisis in the same way, because we have, as a nation, have many waves of immigrations. First, we have guest workers that came after the Second World War. Many Finnish people, Yugoslavian people, Italian people moved to Sweden to work. Then we have all the Latin Americans that came in the 70s because of all the crises that happened in South America. In the early 90s, we had a lot of people coming from Bosnia and Serbia and all over. And now we have this. And we have been able to integrate all these different waves in different situation. And actually, I would say that our economy is as good because of this. What happened in this fall was that we got 160 60,000 in 3 months, and that was too much for the welfare state to take care of. So suddenly the state said no. And what is also happening is that we have a right-wing party that is rising, and we have a lot of people that are angry, that feel powerless, and so on. So we are also part of this trend, we can say, that it's happening now, where we have, I would say, an economy that is more and more headless in terms of that we it's formed by big data. It is the computers that are selling and buying the stocks. It is a new economy in terms of Airbnb and Uber, that is a kind of sharing economy. It's very hard to see who is behind and who is governing this kind of a new economy. In the same time, people are craving for a strong leader, and that is also happening in Sweden. And this is happening all over the world. We see Donald Trump, and we see all these things happening in the same time. So we can't say that Sweden is like outside this. We are also part of that. And then maybe I should say also, as as thinking about my own national identity, I would say that maybe my national identity is coming quite far down on the list, because I'm so used to be, that it's not threatened. So for me, my identity is where I'm coming from, Göteborg. I'm a gay man. I was working for the gay rights. That's one part of my identity. I'm a dog owner. That's also part of my identity. All this, I'm an artist. It's part of my identity. Swedish is maybe coming, quite far down. But, of course, if Sweden as a nature was threatened, it probably will float up very quickly.
Thank you, Mats. And as we were talking in the beginning, we were talking, also mentioning the identity of Donbass and terrible events which are going on in Donbass now. I would like to ask Kristina, who made a work about Transnistria and about all those, actually about construction of the state with a means of visual codes, rituals, different attributes. And I would like to ask you, do you believe that it's possible with such a means, like to really create trustful construction of state, or it's still visible that it's simulacrum, or it's a kind of fake, something fake? And do you feel that there are some parallels with what is going now on Donbass?
Yes, as to this visual simulacrum, it's I think every power is trying to construct some kind of visual simulacrums, and as a person coming from Estonia, which shares common past with these territories of Ukraine, like all the former Soviet Union, and my first interest in Transnistria or Pridnestrovia was because I first dealt with scandalous cases of relocation of the Soviet monuments from the center of the city in Tallinn, and also I made a documentary about a new monument that was constructed on the main square in Tallinn, the Freedom Monument. And and I was interested I got interested in Pridnestrovia because it is a territory that that claims that it has never succeeded from the Soviet Union. So it's like a living memorial to the Soviet Union, or kind of a preserved territory of the Soviet Union with all its visual codes and rhetorics. Yeah, so, but when thinking about the reality of Transnistria, which I was observing for several years, together with my partner, Meelis Muhu, whom we made a documentary about this place and about the political culture in Transnistria, I must say that that on the one hand, you see these politicians who are leading this process of creating this visual codes, and who are building more and more monuments. But at the same time, you see that there is also the need from the society to have those, because when the situation on the daily level is so difficult to bear, you need those celebrations and to be part of this kind of common rituality of belonging together. And in Transnistria, it is very obvious that it's like that. Even if people are very critical towards the few oligarchs that own the country and the president that never changes, but still, there is this. You feel that there is this need also from the people to share this culture of belonging.
Yeah, that's interesting when you said about that there's need for people to share this feeling of belonging. Because as you mentioned, this Alyosha monument, which was removed from the center of Tallinn to some suburban area, and I remember that you made this small figure of copy of this monument. And
it wasn't small, it was life size.
It was life. No, but you also remember.
The small ones were before, yes.
Yeah, there was a small one. No, you did the small one as well, and you placed it in the place where initially this monument used to stand, and the people started to put flowers in front of this small copy of the monument, and then you see how those monuments are becoming really like containers of memory, or this particular place is overloaded by this memory and it becomes really very meaningful, and that's really creating kind of this new mythology. But I would like to ask you, how do you feel, what has changed in Estonia, or because both of us, we are coming from Baltic states and we are sharing this quite common understanding, I think, about our common context. And for example, in Latvia, when war started in Ukraine and after Crimea and Donbass, we felt really this fear or really this feeling of fear all over, and even our government came up with very funny gestures. They published a list of suggestions how should we behave in the case of the war, but it was really so absurd that there was like, you should pack your backpack and put soap and matches and something like that. It was really absurd, and then I'm not surprised that, for example, Flo Casero decided to build up her own air force from this roof plate, this material, what is on the roof. Yeah, but how do you feel in Estonia? How the events going on in Ukraine is reflected in your local society? Because also you have rather big Russian community and Estonian community. Does it unite somehow society, or does it divide society? What are those discourses discussed, or what are rhetorics in Estonia now to be discussed related to new identity?
Well, I'm not a sociologist, of course, but it feels that, of course, we are very strongly affected by the Ukrainian conflict and war, and of course we are also. Our media is creating this feeling that we need to be prepared and that we need to learn to use arms. And for a while, last year at least, all these popular TV programs were basically, well, I had that feeling that were promoting guns. So that firearms were constantly part of the this media reality. And but of course, besides this Ukrainian conflict, we also have this kind of fear of refugees arriving in Estonia, which they are not actually, but everyone is horribly scared. And of course we have demonstrations against Islamization of Estonia. At the same time as the majority of refugees arriving to Estonia are from Ukraine. And at the same time we are very much supporting the Ukrainian cause in this conflict. And so there's very little logic in this situation because this fear of the situation that is not present is so big that yes, it's quite paradoxical in some cases. Yes.
Yeah, you were talking about fear, which is sometimes like paradoxical and really unbased on reality. And obviously we do have so many stereotypes about many things, and we are using those stereotypes without even being introduced in those new aspects. And therefore I would like to switch to Oliver, and Oliver together with Tellervo Kalleinen, you created actually it's a very huge project about 101 Finns, but it's in the exhibition you can see only small part of the project, but in general the whole project is based on revisiting stereotypes or prejudice or things like that. And I would just want to ask that did you during this project somehow figure out what is the identity of Finnish society, or not really?
Well, first I would like to talk about myself. Because when I was invited to this panel, I was thinking about my own journey, and so I'm born in East Germany, or German Democratic Republic, in 1971. It's a country which doesn't exist anymore. It was a country I was not particularly fond of. I moved into West Germany in Hamburg in the early 90s, and I was very disappointed from West Germany. It was not at all this glorious country what I had imagined in my teenage times. I moved to Iceland to study in the art academy in Iceland, and then later relocated to Helsinki, Finland. My partner is Finnish. I took her name because she didn't like my German name, which is actually a Slavic name, and in Finnish it means soon, and she hates that word. So the problem is that I don't speak very well Finnish, so I cannot pronounce my own name. I cannot pronounce the name of my partner and of my son either. Also, I speak 90%, I communicate in English, which is not my native tongue, and I hold 5 passports. Besides German, I'm also a passport holder of the NSK state in time, the Transnational Republic, the state of sabotage, and the Republican monarchy of Ladonia. So I'm, in terms of national identity, I should be extremely confused personality, disturbed personality, but I feel quite fine. So that's a bit my context, and also kind of important perhaps for you to understand where I'm coming from. The project 101 for all, it was a project we did for 1 year last year, and we made a statistical research where we tried to find 100 people which form this very perfect cross-section of the Finnish population. So we had about 10 statistical criteria: gender, age, income, location, living place. And we tried to create this 100 profiles, and then we were actually searching for 100 people which matched these profiles. So you could say we would shrink the whole Finnish population in 100 people. And then we went to visit them in their homes, and we had a very long discussion with them about all kind of very difficult, controversial issues. And we not only wanted to know why, what they think about those issues, but also where their opinions come from. And now I come back to your question, what was basically the most revealing moment for me, that I was really full with prejudices, what I thought Finnish people are, and I didn't realize until I met these 100 people, and I realized that people are so much more complex, so much more complicated, but they are also very wise, and actually none of the prejudices what I carried hold up during this process of 1 year. So actually I had to forget everything what I thought I knew about Finland.
You mentioned that you are holder of NSDK passport and also of this state of sabotage, and I forget which was the third one. Yeah. Because then, like 10 years ago, or when was it, you organized a forum of micronations in Helsinki? It was quite a long time ago. And then you invited those small self-proclaimed states who are also building up their state representation with different symbols and rituals to come together and to discuss issue of small micronations. And I think that in this particular moment, this project gains a new actuality, new voice. But do you think that there is future for such a micronations? Probably it could be served as a utopian model of new society. How do you feel about it?
Okay, so this event was in 2003. It was called the first summit of micronations, where we had invited 6 self-declared countries. Some are more following a traditional model, like this is Principality of Sealand. They occupied a kind of a strange platform in the North Sea and in the late 60s and created this country, the Sealand. Others were more experimental, like the Transnational Republic, which proposes like model of countries which have overlapping territories. So you would be basically countries without territories. Then there's the Kingdom of Elgaland-Vagaland, which kind of occupied all the no man's lands between the countries. So what was interesting for me in this process when we organized this event, that of course the journalist always, so what is a micronation? So, and I had to find some answer, and so I was first looking, so what is a nation? And I looked a lot of books, but there's actually no definition what people can agree on, what is a nation. So then we also, a friend of us went to the United Nations and he asked the ambassadors and diplomats and legal scholars, so what's a nation? They should know because you are the United Nations, but also none of them could give a satisfying answer. That was the first takeaway. Another, what we learned from this summit of micronation is that national identity is to a very large extent a fiction. It's a script. It's an imagined community, as Andersen described it, and in that way you have the possibility to rewrite and play with this script, with this fiction. And actually we should be much more playful with it. So that's why I think Ladonia is an interesting case. They have, every citizen can be a minister. So they have, I think they have about 300 ministries. So Ministry of Art and Charm, Ministry of Offense, Ministry of, I don't know, tape, duct tape and so on. So that is an interesting approach to ministries. So, but also after now revisiting this project, we learned that also there's a certain limitation to these projects, and in the moment I'm not anymore, so I don't find that very relevant. I think I'm much more now interested in peer-to-peer culture, open knowledge, open software, open data. And I think those movements are, per definition, they are transnational, they are transgress any kind of national borders, and that's where I see the future.
And how do you see the transition process, what is going on now in Finland, or is there any transition process? For example, Mats mentioned that describing the situation in Sweden, because contrary to Sweden, in Finland you have this downturning economy, and also you have very strong presence of far right-wing politicians in your parliament, and also all those questions we are facing about refugees and also this Ukrainian situation, how all those aspects affect the, let's say, this identity in Finland. Of course, it's rather difficult to, not difficult, but probably even more interesting to ask it to you, because you went started your answer with kind of explication about your diverse identity, but probably therefore you have this outsider view to what's going on in Finland now.
Well, of course, we made this tour, this about 60,000 kilometer tour, where we visit this 100 people in their home, and that was a good cross-section of the Finnish population. We had this different income, ages, and education, and so on, background. So actually, we spoke with 100 people from all kind of strands of life, and in that way, after these interviews, after this tour, I became actually very optimistic, not at all depressed, because all of these people were decent people, and they had opinions I couldn't agree with, but somehow through their storytelling I could somehow empathize with them, and I think it's mainly these very loud voices which get the media attention, but I think people are, after all, pretty decent, and so I'm not very worried.
When we yesterday were doing guided tours, and Roman told about his artwork, about his curtains, and in this case he's depicting kind of this paradise for miners, or this utopian world he imagined could be also probably realized here on the earth in Donbass. And I'm happy to hear that Oliver is saying that you get very optimistic feeling after interviewing all those 101 Finns, and you're quite optimistic about future. But I would like to ask Roman, how do you feel? Do you feel more optimistic about future of Ukraine, Donbass, and what is the general, let's say, like position of the people whom you know, the artists whom you know, the people from Donbass? How do you see development? Of course, it's very like general question. It's really difficult to answer to it, but probably you can just guide us a little bit.
It seems to me that in the majority of the people now, they have the feeling that they are absolutely beyond the control of this situation, and that there is no complete control of this situation or the situation of the top management authorities, and nothing depends on them. Any human being, according to his nature, he believes in something good or something better. Otherwise, it's a disaster now. Of course, the majority of the people I know, they're optimists. We need the optimism on both sides of the border, and I would say that I'm an optimist. And the more people are optimists, and please be optimistic, because this is absolutely necessary as some kind of medicine for the sick people, because optimism will help us to stop the war and find a way out of the situation. And we have already now to discuss what is the way out of the situation. And it seems to me that maybe we're talking about some kind of national conscience or national identity, etc. Maybe it's not the very first question we have to discuss. We have to talk about the future, which can tie the people from the economic point of view, speaking about the economic prospects. which will ensure the welfare and jobs for the people in the future. People not only have to know what is their identity, but they have to know where he's going to live tomorrow, where his or her children will live tomorrow, and what kind of future they're going to have. We have to find the answers to those questions. If we find the ways how to reconcile, to make peace between ourselves, then we can talk about something different. The international community, all those national issues, kind of a decoration of our life, which is wonderful, etc. And it's good that we have two ethnic nations, which is kind of decorates our life. But to stabilize our region, we have to focus the attention on some other aspects so far. And speaking about positive things, and I repeat myself, sometimes I feel a pessimist, but I force myself to be a positive person and think as an optimist. I just slap my cheeks, box on my cheeks, and I just try to, sometimes you have to spank the people or slap the people to make them think differently. We have to think about something positive, and then we can change the situation for the better.
We should finish? Or
Дякую. Якщо ще
Thank you. Maybe somebody has some important comments or clarification. Maybe somebody would like to voice their own opinion, so please introduce yourselves. We still have 10 minutes to go to continue our communication here. Gabriel Ganchuk nation of the state. Do you see some kind of this threat of turning the European Union or the future member states when they become some kind of the United States of America? Different states united in one country. Did you get the question, or should I repeat? He was talking about, don't you fear, if you're talking about today's European Union, in the future member states who are going to join the European Union in the future, don't you think that this entity, like European Union, can transform into something like United States of America? Okay?
I don't think that it will transform into something like United States of America. Of course, it's kind of union based on other values or other principes. But as we see now, that also that there are many questions posed to: is there any need for such a union? And of course, it's precarious situation we are, or uncertain situation we are now. We do not know where it will guide, but I don't think that we will really develop toward United States of America.
It's a very interesting moment, I think, for Europe for the moment, because I think what's happening now is that maybe the European community will not work anymore, because maybe Britain will go out of it. The difference between, for example, how the Western Europe and some of the Scandinavian countries are looking upon multiculturalism and how to deal with refugees, and how some of the Eastern Europe states are looking at this. So it's a lot of things that is actually going in the other direction. Not to form something, it's actually we are departing from each other, and that is a bit worrying, I think. And that is, I think, maybe a kind of crisis that comes up now. And how do we deal with, for example, Turkey? And, all this stuff is coming up now. So it's an interesting moment. I was once in a show in Romania in 2003, and I was looking at the painting they had there, which was depicting Iași. That was Iași, the small city lying on the border to Moldavia. And it was showing all the nationalistic people, different nations in the city in 1820. So you had Austrians, you had Turks, you had Gypsies, you had all these different people from so on. And I pointed out that painting and said, this is back to the future. This is what you're going to happen to you when you go into European community, because they were supposed to just enter the European community. Suddenly you go in as a nation, but you will become multinational, and that is so problematic for many of the recent countries that came into Europe to actually accept that that actually happens. So, for example, the gypsies now from Romania, they are in Scandinavia begging. That's part of the deal, to be part of the European community.
Like in the internet, you find some animation. Somebody made an animation where you see maybe from the last 1,000 years how the borders in Europe have changed, which countries come and go, and if you see the bigger picture, so you will. It is evident that this will change, and it will change to something what we don't know yet. And I guess these borders also will be less relevant, less important. Maybe a short anecdote still, which illustrates this idea is, maybe you remember this Eurovision Song Contest. A couple of years there was these monsters, they won the competition. And it was interesting because Finnish president came to the airport, these monsters came there, and everybody said, oh, Finland is great country, we win this Eurovision Song Contest, but it's completely wrong, because actually precisely because of a transnational movement, which is the heavy metal music lover movement. That's why this band win, and there are people who are located in all the countries, and they kind of united and voted this metal band in the first place. So it was completely idiotic to say this is a victory for Finland, this is a victory for heavy metal fans and their nation of metal lovers. So, and that's, I think, the direction we will go, much more of overlapping identities.
Yes, and speaking about the European Union, European Song Contest, is that was it last time that also Australia participated? So yes, maybe we'll have developments that Europe is going to expand. I mean, because it is already, yes, it is already an identity in flux, and within the European Union you have identities constantly traveling and being interconnected, and where do you put this line where Europe starts, or where is the East and where is the West? And so maybe we'll have a capital in Australia.
The question which you asked is a kind of rather artificial issue. No, not artificial, imaginary issue, like a kind of a boiler where all the nations are boiling, you know. And the clear question whether this or another ethnic identity or nation will be absorbed in this boiler or whatever. I think that the fire which heats up this boiler is the flame or the fire of the war or the enmity. We have to understand who is the chef, who is the cook, who is cooking this kind of the soup. We are going to have the Ukrainian borscht, Moldovan mamaliga, some kind of a corn porridge. This is a normal process of cooking something, but we have to understand why we are doing that. The most important, not to burn down the meal. So everything depends on who the chef is. Our friends, thank you very much for most productive and fruitful discussion. Thank you for being with us. We do invite everybody to visit this National Artistic Museum within the next period of time, just to see the exhibits, to try to understand who we are, maybe become those chefs, or at least cooks, who actually determine the direction of the process taking place in Ukraine. Of course, it was our pleasure to host this very interesting discussion in our premises, because At 12:30 every day we have this kind of new information from the anti-terrorist operation zone. And somehow after that we had this kind of artistic reflection following that information. So once again, thank you very much. I can see that you're freezing on this stage. We have some hot coffee available, so we are going to continue our communication. Thank you very much again.
I think we managed in this 1 hour.